As I promised you, because we've been talking about this really interesting report from Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Committee, which has led to much discussion and debate, and we spent some time trying to declutter it for you. So, as I had promised you, who better than to have the main author herself, Shamika Ravi, now a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Committee and noted with a doctorate from NYU, has been a professor at Indian School of Business in Hyderabad, has worked at Brookings, etc., etc., etc. Right now, full time at Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Committee, and they've produced the paper that we've been talking about, and that you see on your TV channels as well. Well, we've made our own modest effort to try and explain to you what the numbers in this paper mean. Now, there are numbers and there is politics, and also where is an academic coming at on this issue. That's the reason I requested Shamika, and I know she's much in demand. And thank you, Shamika, for agreeing to find time. So let's get started right away. First of all, give me the three headline points from your paper. This paper, I'll display it here. All of you can see it. The headline is Share of Religious Minorities, a cross-country analysis, 1950 to 2015. It's an analysis of 167 countries for which data is available. And the authors, Shamika Ravi, Abraham Jose, Apurv Kumar Mishra. So my bit is done. Now tell us the three headline points from this research or this paper.
So, Shekhar, basically, we started doing this almost 8 months back when we became aware of this novel data set. It's called Religious Characteristics of States. So, RCS-DEM data set, which has been put together by a group of scholars from US universities. And it really looks at shares of different religions in different countries over many decades. So we then use a cutoff of 1950 because that was right the beginning of decades of economic growth. So in that sense, post-war, and we ended by 2015, which is when the data until when it is available. Now there are many, that's the larger motivation. But at the back of our heads, we also wanted to genuinely test this growing this hypothesis that India is actually it's not a very it's a majoritarian country. It's not particularly hospitable to its minorities, and so on and so forth. So that was also playing at the back of our heads. When we looked at this data, we basically, instead of looking at individual minority shares, what we do is we look at what is happening to majority, and basically 100 minus the majority gives you the composite share of minority population. Now remember, there are very few countries where you have only one minority. It's usually a group. And when we do that analysis, certain very striking sort of results come up. One is that India is really following the path. Yes, you have a question?
No. I'm counting. I asked you for three headlines, so I'm counting.
Okay.
I'm just being a good student.
Okay. India is following the path of what Western liberal democracies are, which is that the share of minority over time is expanding. So in that sense, we are really like the more developed liberal plural democracies of the world. The second is that we are also quite anomalous. We are unlike what is common in our neighborhood. So if you look at the SAARC+1, this neighborhood, then you see that other than Myanmar, we as a country are the only place where you've had a 7.8% increase in the minority share over 65 years. Because all our neighbors, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, and Bhutan, have had alarming decline in their minority share. So in that sense, India does stand out. And the third point, I think for me, it was particularly interesting, is that, the denominations, the religious denominations over time, and just 65 years is not that long, is so drastic in places like Africa. For instance, in 1950, there were 24 countries where animism was the most, majority religion in 24 countries. And today, none of them have animism. So it also tells you what is happening to conversion and how a lot of these indigenous religions, etc., are disappearing. So I think those were the three broad findings.
Yeah. Now, you've already told us what you think India should be proud of. which is that the fact that the percentage of minorities as to the overall percentage of population. That is, this is not to say that the number of Hindus is coming down. The Hindu population is also increasing, but on the base, the percentage of minorities is going up. And your hypothesis is that when percentage of minorities goes up, it's an indicator that the country is welcoming of minorities, and also gives them protection, gives them opportunity. And you've also used the example of gender studies to say that it's, after all, you see, male female ratio to say how gender equal a place is. So you've applied the same principle. So I
Yeah.
understand that we Indians should feel happy and satisfied that minorities are doing well. They are growing in numbers. Otherwise, they'll be voting with their feet, and they'll be leaving the country, and they'll be refugees in some other countries, or they'll be tens of millions of asylees, not a few hundred or few thousand asylees. That I take it. So first of all, is there anything for India or any community in India to worry about?
You know, it's not so much from a community and worrying, Shekhar. We have to look at these things from scientific policy making. Now, remember, we are one of the few countries that actually define minorities. That is one of the symbols or signals that we are serious about minority protection, right? Countries like China do not even have definitions, right? Most majoritarian countries do not have minority or minority affairs as a dedicated policy space for government. So we have that. I think what is important from the Indian perspective is that, you know, we do care about minority. We have a lot of policy making which is driven. We have an entire ministry of minority affairs. We have lots of policies at the federal, central level, as well as the state levels, which are catering to different demographies. And I think without scientific and objective assessment of how things are on the ground, how are we even to talk about some of these policies and what is happening to these policies over time? And I think we did see a gap in the literature. You know, we have not been able to find anything substantial in the last few decades on what is happening to religious demographics and shares in India on the ground. Now, again, you know, I think this is too little. You know, this is the first attempt. I think it is step zero to having more conversations on what exactly does it mean. But I think even as far as research is concerned, while it is an objective measure, but it's a national measure. We really need to have a lot of these studies at state levels. Because implementation of a lot of our policies that pertain to minority affairs, etc., health policy, education policy, etc., are state subject. So I think this is just the beginning. It fills a certain gap in the literature, and it helps us think about policy implication, policy effectiveness, and also future policy.
So let's leave out Pakistan and Bangladesh for now, or what used to be Bangladesh, or what we might call as the CAA applicable nations for us. Let's leave those out for now. Let's just look at India. If we see the percentage of Hindus having come down by what? 7.2% over these 65 years. This is 65 years between 1950 to 2015. So if the percentage of Hindus has come down by 7.82% from 84.68% in 1950 to 78.06%. Once again, these are percentages. So it's not as if the number of Hindus is coming down, while the percentage of Muslims has gone up from 9.84% to 14.09%. Other minorities in India are mostly relatively microscopic and mostly stable. Christians are a little bit up, Sikhs are a little bit up, but mostly stable. That said, this is the political headline in today's polarized politics. How serious a political headline is that? And do you think this has any significance at all?
No, I think any aspect of policy that pertains to religion always tends to get sensitive, Shekhar. But my sense is that, you know, if we don't, you're not going to have any constructive conversation, any progressive or scientific conversation, if we are to only do it anecdotally. Then it is my experience versus your experience, and then the shrillness of it just overtakes everything. So that's why I say this is step zero, to let's at least gauge objectively what the situation is happening, you know, as it is unfolding. on the ground. And I think that is why many people are actually surprised at the finding, and I'm surprised that folks are surprised. Because if you look at, or you ask any demographer in India, if you speak to any of the development economists who have been looking at data over time, I don't think any of them would be surprised. So in that sense, it's not a terribly complicated intellectual exercise. This is just a trend. But I think the numbers might have surprised a few.
Yeah. So, in fact, if you look at just our own census data, unfortunately, 2021 is not available to us. But if you see, even if you go, say, 1951 onwards, but just look at 81, 91, 2001, 2011, you can see that Muslim birth rate is higher than Hindu birth rate. That data is available. Gap is about 1. If the Hindu birth rate is 2.4, the Muslim birth rate is about 3 point something, or total fertility rate is about that much. But that gap has also been narrowing. That said, because the gap is there, you are right to say that nobody should be surprised that the gap in their percentages, relative percentages in the total population has narrowed to whatever extent. In fact, the percentages that you calculate, the Hindu percentage of the overall population has gone down by 7.82%, whereas the Muslim percentage has gone up by 43.5%. However, the base there is much smaller. Base is 9.84, and sometimes the absolute and percentages tend to be confusing. However, the fear, I won't say fear mongering, maybe there is some of that, the fear that, oh, soon we'll be run over by Muslims, soon we will become a Muslim country, soon Muslims will be in a majority, right? Does your research actually address those concerns and give it a reality check and say, no, things are not that fraught? Or are you saying, no, there are issues that need to be addressed?
Actually, Shekhar, we don't say any of these things. I think the contribution here is that we have looked at 65 years and just seen how the relative shares have changed. Thereby, first of all, looking at a final outcome of all these different policies, which is towards minority welfare. And in that sense, we are far, far better placed for a plural society than most countries. And I think that is something to be terribly proud of in a current sort of global environment. That is, I think it's a very important takeaway, and one that must be underscored. But at the same time, remember, it's not most conversations, or even the way you're thinking of it, you're limiting yourself to just fertility. The change in share of religious demographics, as in the European case, right? It's not just fertility is not really the driving factor.
It's a lot more migration. In Europe, It's a lot more migration, yes.
And in Africa, it is conversion.
Yes.
As you are seeing in the form of 24 countries that were animist,
countries like Liberia, Namibia, you quote, where in fact, Liberia has a 99.1% change. So all the animists have become Christian.
For me, that was a takeaway. The 24 countries that were animist, none of them have animism, which means, indigenous faiths, monotheistic faiths, they are under an assault, right? So conversion is very much a reality. So let's not limit ourselves to only thinking of fertility rate as the key driver of it, right? And I think
that is globally. I'm looking at India and the Hindu-Muslim context. Because Hindu-Muslim context, if you just look at fertility rate difference, that itself might be able to explain this much difference.
So I think that itself is an empirical exercise worth doing, that if you look at the relative differences in the shares, and again, if you look at it state by state or perhaps district by district, which we did in one of the EPW articles, there also we do not look at factors. We look at overall change just to see what things are on the ground. But I think this can be done. It can be done that, having controlled for fertility differences, do we have unexplained variation that exists? And then we can say that, look, it is perhaps on account of migration, perhaps it's on account of conversion, but at least there we are beginning to understand what is driving this.
Yeah, because the important thing is that the percentage of Christians is not changed that much, just 2.24% to 2.36%, right? Some of it might be due to conversions in tribal areas, but there is nothing significant there, and that's where more of the proselytization takes place. The other
These are
important,
empirical questions, Shekhar. I mean, I don't know,
go
uh,
ahead.
whether it's Christianity, and that's why we look at minority as a group. That where is the problem? What you just stated as a fact, to me, it is an open empirical question, right? Meaning, religion wise, which is the bigger driving factors? And I think this is where looking at state level variations will give you a better insight.
Right.
So, yeah, that's all for future.
Yeah, because the point you make, which is a very interesting point, is that the more developed a country and more advanced a country and more developed, advanced, and democratic a country,
Yeah.
the greater the decline in the percentage of the majority population, right?
Yeah.
That means more welcoming the country is of others. Uh, so, for example, your study of OECD countries, you've taken 35 out of, and you've explained why you've excluded some. For example, Germany, not enough data is available from East German era. So, of the 35 you've taken, 33 have seen a decline in the percentage of the majority population starting in 1950. And the net decline, the net average decline within these 33 countries is 29% of that order. And these are, what is OECD? These are countries which are the most developed free market economies and
Yes.
and democracies.
Yeah.
And that's where India, being such a poor country, still 2,500 or thereabouts per capita income, and still having this data, your argument is that tells us that we have actually leapfrogged on this liberal democratic index.
Absolutely.
So is this report then a point of concern, or is it a matter of pride?
I think it should be a matter of, it's I want to know how things are in my country. For me, it is a matter of pride that we are plural and we have been extremely supportive and encouraging, and therefore the kind of narrative building you are seeing, not just in the Western press but among scholars as well, that India is not particularly hospitable to minorities, or is unwelcoming. That's not true at all. On the ground, the reality is that minority as a group is thriving. And this is again, you're talking about the Muslim population within that. For me, it's equally important that the Muslim share is increasing, Christian share is increasing, Sikh share is increasing, and Buddhists. However
only
minuscule it might
only
be.
the Parsis, if only the Parsis change their laws a little bit, because
Yes.
it's such a small community and they are down like what, 88% or something, right?
Yeah.
Really, they are moving the other side of decimal and putting zeros between themselves and the decimal. So I think Parsis have to do something about this. India can't have so few Parsis. India just needs more Parsis. That's an indicator as well. Now, Pakistan is one thing. Bangladesh is another, because we start with 1950. That's where your research begins, and then 1971 it becomes a different country. So first of all, it is a matter of concern, and it's a clear and present issue that Bangladesh started with 22% Hindu population in 1950, and that data you picked up from Pakistani census reports. Pakistan had its first census also in 1951. 22% Hindu population, now it's down to 8%. So those people have gone somewhere, and we know that there have been many waves of migration of Hindus from Bangladesh into India. There have been two waves at least in the 50s, then 1963, that's when the Hazrat Bal incident took place in Kashmir, then 1965 war and thereabouts just after that, and then 1971 the war. So there have been great waves of Hindu flight from Bangladesh, of what used to be East Pakistan. So that is a matter of concern, and that impinges on the politics of the region as well. That said, if we look at Pakistan, there is one data point in your research that I found intriguing, and I did call you and to check with you, and maybe you can explain it. When we see Pakistan, it shows the population of Hindus at 13.5% in 1950 and 2% now. So my immediate question, and that's the reason I called you, was that where did the rest go? And could it be that there is double counting, that these were 13.5% in combined Pakistan at that point, and then for analysis, because you've taken Bangladesh out as the inheritor state of East Pakistan, these numbers have gone there. So will you please explain to me, will you please explain for our viewers what you said to me?
Well, so as is explained in the paper, we look at legal entities and Pakistan, so meaning jurisdiction. So in 1950, you did have a Pakistan. So the relative share of majority and minority, and remember, minority in Pakistan is not just Hindus. There are lots of non-Hanafi Muslim groups which are also part of. So it's not the majority group, right? And in after 1971, we know that there was partition. At which point, then the numbers depict as per
Yeah.
two legal jurisdictions.
Yeah.
And in 2015, now of course you have two separate countries. Yes.
So then the like to like comparison is not 13.5% Hindus in 1950 and 2% Hindus now. That 13.5 is subsumed. The Bangladeshi share is subsumed on that
Yes.
side, is Pakistan share. Then the
Yes.
correct comparison as per Pakistan census report is 1.56% in West Pakistan in 1951 and 2% now.
Well, the
That is
difference is around 3.75% for all minorities
for all.
in Pakistan. Yes.
Yes, all minorities have come down by 3.5% in
Correct.
Pakistan, and Muslims have gone up by 3.75%. So anything that majority goes up by or goes down by is a net loss or net gain for the minorities. I think
Correct.
that's a much easier way of
Yeah.
teaching students of this.
Yes.
So
But quite surprisingly, I mean, we have seen similar trends in Sri Lanka and Bhutan as well.
yes. Yes, well, Bhutan is a bit complicated because Bhutan's a bit complicated. We can talk about that in the course of time because most Hindus there would be Nepalese. I don't
Yes.
know how many of them are given citizenship, how many of them are counted. So Bhutan
Or
is
human refugees and so on. No, listen, I think, Shekhar, it's important to understand. That's why we are abstracting away.
right,
It's each country has its own complicated histories.
right, right.
And that is why we do not even get into the different factors. We are just looking at the net share and basically saying if the share rises of minority, then it is I mean, the null hypothesis is that you do have an environment which is conducive to minority welfare. That's really a very limited point. And then the cross country studies become more interesting at
Yeah,
that point.
and finally, the point that I'm sure you are facing and you will face,
Hmm.
that the timing of the release of this report, that this release of the report in the middle of an election campaign. I know that model code of conduct doesn't apply to everything, but is that loaded, or you think it's incorrect to see it as loaded?
Shekhar, we are researchers. A lot of this is public data. One could have any time put this together. I remember even in the midst of the pandemic, people saying, "Why are you putting out statistics? Because when things improve, people will become complacent. So don't put out statistics. Or when things are worsening, people will become fearful." As empiricists, as people, the whole idea of policy making becoming scientific means not knowing is not necessarily better than putting out these kind of objective. And I think the other thing I want to focus on, this is not government data, Shekhar. And this is a scholarly work. It's meant for public discussion. This should really open up. People should read it and engage with us. I mean, we are more than happy to consider relevant statistical or points which can improve the study or our understanding of what is happening in terms of the timing, the intent. I think we should leave the politics out of it and leave it to the politicians.
And so, to that extent, the timing of the release is not loaded. Nobody called you and said, "Shamika, is time mein nikal dena." Look,
Really think we are I mean कोई इलेक्शन कैंपेन में रिसर्च पढ़ रहा है बगैर मुझे तो नहीं लग रहा लेकिन नहीं we don't get calls asking to do
Well, I
Well
think
said.
as you said, there is need to engage, and that's why I'm grateful to you that you found time to engage and answer questions and also settle some doubts. So thank you very much. Data. People say, first of all, people said data is the new oil, right? Then somebody said, oh, no, 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 data is the new gold, etc., etc. Today, data has become something, because it's become so difficult to find, that data is something a lot more valuable than oil, gold, anything. And that's why when data comes, I welcome it, because it gives you the starting point for many conversations, which is what you've done now, Shamika, you and your colleagues.
I do
Thank you very
want
much.
to make a comment. My sense data is crude oil. There's a lot of it. In fact, you have more data than you have ever had historically. But it needs to be processed. Now, even
Absolutely
this particular data, Shekhar, has been in public domain for almost 5, 6 years. You see, there is a
right.
lot of data out there. I think this is also an encouragement to, the scholarly and the research community. It's our country and we need more evidence, and let's engage in a scientific way, which is not hearsay and anecdotal. इसको scientific करते हैं, data से देखते हैं.
Well, people like us who are not academics, at least we see census data and we see NFHS data. If you looked at all that data, I would have imagined this kind of percentage changes. So in that sense, I would say this data is also reassuring, in the sense that things are not as alarming. First of all, it's not as if there is no difference. It's not as if the gap between the Hindu and Muslim population, that's the political point, that is not narrowing. It's narrowing, albeit at a certain pace. So there is no need for alarm. At the same time, there is no point living in denial. And that's the reason what we could deduce from NFHS and census figures, which is that there is a gap in fertility rates, although
Yeah,
the gap is narrowing, but there is still a gap. And
correct.
if the gap has narrowed over the decades, there is a sizable overhang. This, however, gives us a more rounded, a more complete picture. And that's why this is worth debating and talking about. And I'm sure this will be among the more talked about pieces of research that you've done. And it's very user friendly. It is very friendly to people like me, that's people, that is journalists who have really very little understanding of statistics, and if I may say so, with humility, data as well. So thank you
You're
very
being
much.
modest, but thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.